hunting community, reenactors, collectors, and arms cultural people and target shooters under having one aim is really historic. So I would like to thank, for sport shooters, I would like to thank DASA, SAFE, for the hunters, FKNK and KSU, and for the reenactors, HRGM, Malta Command, and Battlefront. Please thank them. Dr. Soller.
Do I get a thingy for the slides? Thanks. Okay, it's simple. Hi, so my perspective here is in two ways. I'm the secretary for Amex, but as you know, since 4 or 5 years, some of you have been collectors for many, many more years. But for the last 4 or 5 years, after I finished my studies, the hobby I took up was firearm shooting and collecting. And so I'm relatively a novice, but what my expertise I hope to bring in is as a researcher rather than as a medical doctor, is that looking at something objectively, looking at the evidence, and looking at whether there is any evidence for these proposals which come from the European Commission. So my talk is about evidence for change. I don't want to spend too much time on this. We need to hurry on. But basically, the Commission has asked for studies what was necessary in the revision of the directive, and they got an answer, and they spent a lot of money. Steve maybe will tell us how much. But basically, the recommendations from the experts they themselves appointed and consulted said there is no specific concern for the conversion of semi-automatics to automatic firearms. There was no evidence that was clear. There was no need for any provision on semi-automatic firearms and limiting their conversion to automatics. It doesn't happen. It is not an issue with regard to crime, with regard to terrorism. And also, with regards to the conversion of automatic to semi-automatic and vice versa, the European Commission was advised to do more research. An in-depth analysis needs to be conducted. These were the recommendations they received from the experts they consulted to provide evidence for any changes in the directive. And with respect to online sales of firearms and their parts, the evaluation provided non-legislative recommendations to strengthen knowledge on new technologies, in other words, internet and whatever. So, do you see anything here about deactivating firearms in museums, magazine bans, etc., etc.? Nothing there. And do I need to point it in a particular direction? It doesn't, there it works. Suddenly, over 2 or 3 days, the Commission came up with a number of proposals immediately after the November 2015 attacks. So, inclusion of collectors and museums in the directive, mandating member states. Let's not forget, this is not about not trusting individuals. This is about not trusting member states to trust individuals. It's even worse. In other words, no European government can be trusted to enact its own firearm laws. It's the Commission that has to tell them what to do. And it should have been a minimum standard. Instead, it was imposing a retroactive ban on the possession of automatic firearms without exceptions, including those in museums and collections, which would have to be deactivated, banning firearms on the basis of resemblance, ban on online, we forgot about this one, ban on online acquisition. Any email, internet sales were to be banned. Limitations of magazine capacity, we forgot about. Restrictions on airsoft firearms, they were all to be destroyed. Anything which looked like a Steyraug or an AR or an AK-47, a BB gun, was to be destroyed. And other administrative restrictions on certification, medical tests, etc., etc. We know of the criticism that they received. Let's not forget, our adversary is the Commission, not the European Parliament or the Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers came up with very reasonable arguments against these proposals. The European Parliament rejected most of them. So let's not target our anger towards the people who have been supportive. So they were harshly criticized, and they were even criticized by the European Parliament Research Service, which said, in drafting the proposals, the European Commission broke its own better regulation guidelines, which say that there should be an impact assessment. Independently of all this, is there any evidence that banning firearms has a beneficial effect? Approximately 10,000 people died in the decade from 2000 to 2010 through manslaughter or murder by firearms. So it's 1,000 people a year die in the European Union through manslaughter or murder by firearms, which include people shot by the police. And there are an additional 4,000 suicides by firearms per year. So this is the nature of the problem, 5,000 deaths by firearm per year. However, the total rate of gun-related deaths, including accidents, is probably higher, something like 7,000 per year. I would like to thank Katja Triebel specifically for having collected some of this information. Other parts of it I have also collected myself. The vast majority of firearm-related deaths are suicides. Let's not forget. Only about 15% of firearm-related deaths are homicide. Okay? And only about 9% of all suicides are related to firearms, and again, mostly it's shotguns. So nothing here is saying semi-automatic rifles or semi-automatic pistols which are legally registered. In fact, there is no consistent association between gun ownership and total suicide rates across countries. So countries with high ownership of guns have low rates of suicide. Countries with high rates of suicide have low gun ownership. So there is no evidence, there is no link, there is no magical formula for reducing deaths by introducing laws. Firearms are only used in about 20% of homicides. I believe in the United States, nearly half of homicides are perpetrated by hammers or blunt instruments. The handguns most often used, more often used than rifles or shotguns. Unfortunately, when you're talking about homicides, we don't know what proportion are by illegal or by legal firearms. So even there, the research is very weak. Looking at the literature, I am a researcher. So when there's something, I have a question, the first thing you do, rather than trying to answer it yourself, you go to the literature and see if someone has done that. Well, if you look, there is a study which tried to find a link between firearm ownership and firearm crime. And total homicides, total suicides, there is no link. It's in the medical literature. The reference is Kilias et al. Duque and Alstein performed an analysis of gun ownership and violent deaths in 33 European countries. And they found a relationship between firearm ownership and firearm-related suicide. As you reduce the firearm ownership, people use another method of committing suicide. It does not reduce, restriction does not reduce the rates of suicide. In Australia, there was a major ban in 1996. Many firearms were repossessed and destroyed, including semi-automatic firearms. After that, the rate of firearm crime and firearm homicide came down, but it kept coming down at the same rate it had been before the ban. There was no effect. In the United Kingdom, after the bans implemented in 1996, after the Dunblane massacre, which was again because of a police deficiency rather than anything from the legal gun club. Yeah, but that's later. In 96, they implemented the big cleanup, and after that, the rate of firearm offences doubled in the decade afterwards. And this graph is from, I don't know, the laser works. So if they banned firearms here, these are the rate of crimes with all weapons, excluding air weapons, and with air weapons, and you can see it went up by nearly double in the 10 years afterwards. or towards the end of the 10 years afterwards. So banning firearms does not stop crime. In fact, there are some studies which show it has, to some degree, the opposite effect. So there is no evidence for any of these drastic proposals from the Commission. That is clear. What about the number of legal and illegal firearms? The estimates for illegal firearms in Europe are estimated anywhere between 81,000 and 67 million. That's a 1,000, nearly 1,000 times margin of error. So you can see how good the data are. However, there are approximately 25 million gun owners and 80 million legally registered firearms in the European Union. 1/3 of them are for professional use, police, army, security services, 23% for sports, and only 5% for collectors. Again, reminding that this, summarizing it, we come to the same conclusion that the experts commissioned by the European Commission came to. There is no evidence to support the concern of conversion of firearms into automatic firearms and being used for mass murder or crime or terrorism. So there is no basis for this. This is an entirely political exercise. Let's not forget that the directive review, some of us are saying it should be thrown out. There are some good ideas in the directive proposals. Some of the proposals are pretty good. For example, common European rules on marking of newly manufactured firearms. Makes sense. Improved exchange of information between EU member states. An obligation to interconnect EU member state national registers. Common criteria for the definition of distress and alarm firearms and for deactivated firearms. One can agree with these, no problem. The problem is all the other extreme proposals. We must not forget we had a lot of support from the European Parliament. The majority of the Commission proposals were defeated in votes in the LIBE committee and the IMCO committee. And there was opposition for them as well in the Council of Ministers. But despite opposition from a number of countries, the magazine capacity thingamagig, which came to the Council of Ministers. And it was then at the last minute put into the IMCO vote. IMCO, the Parliamentary Commission which is leading for the European Parliament, has accepted a number of proposals. If you look at the ones that were accepted, most of them are not problematic. For example, firearm ownership subject to proof of good cause. Firearm rules for safe storage. Firearm markings regulated and standardized. From IMCO, it was only applying to newly manufactured firearms. These are things you can agree with. Police and armed forces may sell redundant firearms. They don't need to be deactivated or destroyed. Why should they be thrown away if they can be reused? The role of dealers and brokers being defined, and the database, and the registration of a firearm as soon as it is transferred. Requirement of permits to purchase firearms and ammunition. There's nothing wrong with these proposals, and these were accepted by IMCO. However, internet sales have been allowed. Standards for blank firing arms, airsoft and replica firearms are out of the scope of the directive. However, during the trialogue now, we had this new addition. Collectors and museums, subject to the directive, but are allowed full rights to continue to collect historical and cultural firearms, including automatics. But then you had this strange thing of a firearm. If you put in a magazine, it becomes category A. You take out the magazine, it becomes category B. And then you have an exception for sport shooters. Others have talked about it before. I won't go into detail, but it doesn't make sense that you prohibit a firearm and then you allow an exception for sport shooters. But then if they make a mistake, you take their license away. And the dangerousness of a firearm is dependent on what magazine you insert in it, as if it makes any difference. Another one which hasn't been mentioned, and I think we must not forget, there is a clause delegating powers to the Commission to change categories of firearms again in 2 years and then every 5 years. It has to be duly reasoned. But we have seen how good they are at sticking to their own regulations. This is one I would give more attention to. Delegating powers to the Commission when we don't trust, the Commission, I don't think it's something we should support. Yeah. So we should pay more attention, I think, to this. Yes.
Can I ask you something?
Absolutely.
Okay. Regarding this idea of not trusting the Commission.
Yes.
Because of, well...
Because of the history, because they've been proposing things not based on evidence.
So would that have an impact on, if they would manage to have semi-auto rifles go into Cat A?
Yes.
Yeah? Would that jeopardize the future of those weapons in Cat A?
Oh yes, oh yes, because what they can do is they can do something silly like put shotguns in Category A, for example.
Thank you. That's
However, what has been put in, I haven't seen the final text in the trialogues, but what has been, it requires to be supported by evidence. However, we've seen that they have ignored this in the past. So now you have the trialogue. I don't know whether my spelling or the other spelling is correct. This is a process of reconciliation between Parliament, Council of Ministers and the Commission. It's been reported on previously, so I won't take too much time. The Commission is not happy with the final agreement, which makes us happy. But on the other hand, there is still much more work we can do, and we have had a number of suggestions in Parliament and also through other legal channels, including European courts, whether this can be challenged. The bad news is that the magazine ban has been upheld, with exceptions for sport shooters, and don't forget, there is a grandfathering clause. So if you have a sports rifle which now goes into Category A and you're legally allowed to own it, you should be allowed to keep it.
Again, it's the same thing that we're under the mercy of
yeah, but
no,
not in this case. In this case, countries are allowed to allow you to keep holding. Collectors can collect Category A, but now the text has been changed. And now it says individual special cases, exceptionally duly reasoned. Yeah, well, what does that mean? I mean, if I am trusted to prescribe the Goxin, which with a slightly changed dose will kill a person immediately, I think I can be trusted to basically have a firearm which has been redundant for 70 or 80 years, but which I would like to preserve for future generations. I think the European Commission should be held to task. Whatever happens, we should take them to task. We should make it a point that people know that the Commission has made statements which are not based on fact, have made statements which are contrary to published evidence, have made recommendations for changes which are not supported by any evidence, have not made the main impact assessment, and have insisted on such changes even when opposed by elected representatives. This is not the role of civil servants. These are civil servants and this is not their job. And I think this we need to take them to task for. Last two slides. This new modus operandi is a dangerous threat to the democratic process. You have a system where you have the Parliament, which is being overruled by the civil servants. This is exactly what is happening. And the fact that individual citizens are not considered trustworthy by the Commission without any evidence for this, I think is something which will remain impressed in the minds of many citizens for many years to come. I would like to thank all of the MEPs who have spoken, but specifically Roberta Metsola and Vicky Ford, who has not spoken, Miriam Dalli, Marlene Mitzi and Alfred Sant from the Maltese side, Vicky especially from the chairmanship of IMCO. Steve Petrone has done a lot of work with a lot of people, but there are other people who have also been working with the MEPs, rapporteurs and government representatives. All I've put on these slides comes from a document I took. Again, I referred extensively to Katja Triebel's work and to other reports which the Commission has used, and I've summarized it all in a document which is available on the Amex website. So if any of you want to use that information, I'd be more than happy to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shankar. Now may I introduce Mikko Personen. Mikko is from Finland, and he's the Finland representative for Firearms United. Now, Finland is quite a particular case. because they have quite a strong sense of citizen gun ownership, even as regards their post-military service. Mikko Personen.
Hello, and thank you for being here today. I'm Mikko Pesonen. I represent the Finnish sport shooters, and I'm also a member of the reserve. You asked where this proposal came from and who is pushing it. I tried to give you a Nordic perspective to the Firearms Directive proposal. Yeah, it's working. And also try to answer those questions. First of all, Finland is in a unique geopolitical situation. We have 1,340 kilometers of land border with Russia. If you ask from people of Ukraine, that's a perfect valid reason. Actually, 1,340 valid reasons of owning a firearm. Or 10. We have 5.5 million inhabitants, and according to Ministry of Interior, we have 1.62 million registered legal firearms. According to the same source, we have at most tens of thousands of illegal firearms. According to organization that fabricates statistics, it's called Small Arms Survey. They have stated and estimated that we have 2.4 or up to 2.4 million firearms and up to 1.5 million illegal firearms. Those numbers do not correlate with reality in any way. What is really troubling, though, is that Small Arms Survey have their experts in a group called Task Force Firearms. That's the group that was used by the Commission as their group of experts who drafted the Firearms Directive. Essentially, they're there and they fabricate statistics.
Could I say something?
Yes,
here?
of course.
Now, for those who don't know, the Small Arms Survey is one of those. They form part of a group of NGOs who are invisibly financed. You don't know where the money is coming from. All we know is that they're based in Geneva, I believe, and that's about it. And these guys are the source of information for the EU Commission. Thank you, Mikko.
Yeah. We have a fairly large community of shooters. We have hunters, sport shooters, collectors, and then some people, small group, own a firearm for professional reasons. Of course, in addition to, or included in this, we have the members of the reserve. Our defense solution relies on large, active, and competent reserve, which practices with their own firearms, but they're listed under hunting and sport shooting. This whole thing started actually in October 2015, when the Finnish Ministry of Interior asked comments for the draft proposal from the Finnish gun owners' organizations. And we were kind of surprised that this kind of proposal was coming, and we also got the warning from the Ministry of Defense. We checked the proposal. That was the proposal that was referred earlier. It was actually, well, the only thing that was wrong with it was that there was a vague reference to most dangerous type of firearms that should be banned, nothing else. Then we actually started digging, what are the most dangerous type of firearms? We contacted the Commission. This is actually a letter that I received from the head of Task Force Firearms when I asked what is most dangerous firearms and will there be any restrictions to semi-automatic firearms. This is the answer I received. The news about possible consideration of the semi-automatic firearms does not seem to be correct. The Commission will assess in due time aspect of possible revision of EU legislation taking into account the position of stakeholders. In other words, they lied. This does not correlate with reality in any way. And this was after the Ministry of Interior had asked comments. So that means that the draft proposal was already sent to all of the member states. The Finnish members of the organizations, individual shooters, we started contacting people, spreading the information. Of course, it was at the beginning dismissed as rumors, but Firearms United responded and requested additional information. Then happened the unfortunate events in Paris, and then 4 days later, new revised proposal had appeared. In 4 days, it's not possible to do impact assessment in 4 days, but now the ban on semi-automatic firearms had appeared. The collectors were now painted as targets, and of course we had the new deactivation rules and 5-year time limits. So now you can think, where does this come from? 4 days. Other highlights, markings, traceability. Let's not go to details there. The worst part was immediate confiscation without compensation. The Firearms United has since traveled to Brussels numerous times. We have been interacting with MEPs, discussing, trying to propose amendments, and we've been working very hard since that. And in Finland, what we've been doing is we've been providing expert assistance to the MEPs when requested. The Finnish organizations, much like here, have come together, issued a joint statement for the rapporteurs regarding our opinion of the directive. And there's also a cross-organizational negotiation team that has been established by the local organizations. And we have met the Ministry of Interior already, and there's a preliminary agreement in place that the firearms enthusiasts and members of the firearms community will be consulted when the implementation of the directive is on the national level. Of course, our goal will be to get the exceptions implemented as widely as possible if the whole directive is not shut down before that. Our role, the role of Firearms United, has been mostly sharing intelligence, providing intelligence to the local organizations that they can act on it. And then, in addition to that, we've taken the role of a watchdog. We have analyzed that all 800 amendments proposed by the MEPs, checked which ones were proposed by our MEPs, analyzed whether they were positive or harmful, and then, of course, we ensured that this information will be available come next elections. That's well, let's not forget, let's vote accordingly. What is Firearms United? It's actually all of us. So it's me, you, all of us. And we're now in this together, and actually that is the only silver lining of this mushroom cloud. Thank you.
Thank Katja Triebel.
And also, we owe a great thanks to Katja Tribo, who has been working very hard for the past year and a half, trying to gather statistics and material for the European organizations to use against the numbers which were fabricated by the Commission. So thank you for her.
And now I am proud to present Malta's own sportsman, Clive Brogdorf, who is the IPSC Malta chapter representative and director. Thank you, Clive.
Towards the place because I'm feeling a bit old and stiff. Well, thanks. As Vince said, I'm Sasha Barnson's equivalent here. As you may notice from our difference in height, Sasha represents a pretty big region of IPSC, and I'm a bit smaller, so I represent a smaller region. But we do punch above our weight, and we do make use of Malta's current firearms legislation in its fullest sense, in that we make use of it here in Malta, and we make use of it abroad, because we travel quite a lot. Sasha already told you what IPSC is all about, but I'd like to mention one thing, our motto, which is diligentia vis celeritas, which is accuracy, power, and speed. And I hope that in these next few minutes, I'll be able to explain what I want to say accurately, forcefully, and hopefully quickly, because I know that the day is rolling on and you're getting tired. I was asked to speak about our Arms Act. I was asked to speak about our Arms Act because it's a very good example of a piece of firearms legislation that works. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. I, personally, I'm quite a libertarian sort of chap, so the less laws there are, the better. But if there are going to be laws, then at least let's make sure they're effective and that they're not too punitive. And I want to talk a bit about how we got where we are today and why it works, and of course how it's going to be messed up. So, it's been a long and winding road, and I say this so that perhaps third parties can understand our passion for it all. We have been working for decades to get where we are today here in Malta, decades. We have no intention of losing all that we have worked for due to the illiberal ideological leanings of a few unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. That is not going to happen. Work started in the late 80s, early 90s. The first changes came about in 1996 to our previous law, which was something called the 1931 Arms Ordinance, which was a monstrous relic of our colonial days, which pretty much allowed practically nothing other than shotguns. And in 1996, after 5 years of hard lobbying, we started being able to purchase air guns, muzzle loaders, old firearms. I bought my first air rifle, my target air rifle, in 1997. And lo and behold, absolutely nothing happened. Whenever firearms laws change, anywhere in the world, as Jean-Carl very pertinently pointed out, there will always be those chicken littles who run around saying that the sky is going to fall. There'll be blood on the streets. The most overused expression is Wild West. It was said back in the media in Malta in the 90s. It was said again in the early noughties. Nothing of the sort happened. Between 1996, when the first changes were made, and 2005, when the new Arms Act was introduced, there was no spike in firearms crime. There was no spike in firearms violence. And it is precisely because of that that we could implement the new 2005 Arms Act, a piece of legislation which was passed unanimously in our parliament. Now, if anybody knows how our parliamentarians work, unanimity is something which is quite rare. So it was quite a It was quite an achievement to obtain that. But it came about because the authorities could look back on the previous 5 years when the legislation had been relaxed, and they saw that there was absolutely no problem. And the same thing happened again in 2013 when we fine-tuned the regulations further. We could point to a good 5-6 years of the Arms Act having been enforced without any issues. And that is really important to keep in mind. Why does it work? Well, it works because it is the result of a joint effort between the authorities and the users. We're all in this together. There is no us and them, it is us. When you have laws which are designed, debated and agreed upon by all the parties concerned, those laws will be respected. When the laws are respected, they will be obeyed. We do not obey the Arms Act we have because we fear repercussions. For repercussions, you have to get caught in the first place. I mean, lots of people break the laws and never get caught. We follow the rules because we respect those rules, because we were among the people who drew them up. And that is why certain laws work and other laws don't. Ridiculous laws are ignored. Laws which are, accepted, which are taken on by everybody, they tend to be followed. Another very important aspect is that the focus is on the licensee and not the firearm. This is, I think, when you come to firearms legislation, this is the be-all and end-all of firearms legislation. Any decent firearms legislation must never, ever focus on the equipment. The equipment is an irrelevance. If I, Clive Brogdorf, am deemed by the state to be a law-abiding, non-psychopathic, non-sociopathic person, it is pointless to tell me that, Clive, you can own a 5-shot target pistol, but you cannot own an AR-type firearm with a 30-round magazine. I beg your pardon. If I'm not trusted with a semi-automatic rifle, I shouldn't be trusted with, somebody said, wet spaghetti. And that's true. Because if I am trusted to uphold the law, to obey the law, I should be trusted with any kind of equipment. And this concept is something which we must always keep focusing upon, which we must always insist with the state in Malta and with the European institutions. Any legislation must focus on the individual. If the individual is a law-abiding person, there is nothing to stop that person from owning any type of firearm he may wish to have. And that and to date, that is the situation which we have here in Malta. So if I am a licensed firearms owner, if I want to buy an AK-style firearm or a target pistol in .22, I can purchase either of them. Of course, the law works by ensuring that firearms do not fall into the wrong hands. And it does that by providing clear guidelines to the licensee as to how to make sure that this does not happen. There are no real grey areas in our Arms Act. It is not overly detailed, but, it says, your firearms must be locked up, the ammunition must be separate, unauthorized persons must not have access to it. This is common sense. But what it does is it gives the licensee a certain amount of confidence, because he knows that if he follows the law, there aren't going to be any problems. There are no grey areas, there's no doubt, there's no fear. It provides clear guidelines as to how we can use our firearms, how we store them, how we use them, how we can travel with them. I mean, we go abroad very often to take part in IPSC matches. And it really goes very smoothly. And when sometimes we do come across some cretin at the airport who causes problems, what we do is we simply show him a printout of the law and we point out the relevant parts and we tell him to shut up and kindly let us go on our way. And that works very well, even though sometimes, it takes a bit of time to convince them. But, you've got the law there and you shove it down their throat. It is, again, not overly restrictive to things like ammunition quantities. Restrictions on ammunition quantities are illogical. If I can keep 1,000 rounds at home, I can keep 5,000 rounds at home. If I can keep 1 round at home, I can keep 5,000 rounds at home. This is irrelevant. You are all honest, law-abiding people. And therefore, the Maltese firearms law understands that, for example, target shooters need a certain load, a certain type of round, a certain loaded to a certain level. And it understands that we might have to stock up sizable quantities of those rounds. You can't just buy 200, then you go to buy again, and they're finished, they've gone. So it takes these things into account, which is why it works. And very importantly, the authorities are quite open to fine-tuning the legislation. Okay, it takes a little time, but through our representatives on the weapons board, we argue, we discuss, we give and take a bit, and at the end of the day, we're all in it together, and yes, usually we get our way. Sometimes it takes a little longer. Our Firearms Act, our Arms Act, covers both collectors and target shooters, and I look at it from a target shooter point of view. And for example, it covers all sporting disciplines. There are no caliber restrictions. For me, as an IPSC shooter, if the minimum caliber is 9mm, if we had legislation in Malta which said, oh yes, you can only use .22 or 7.67, it would automatically ensure that we couldn't practice our sport. But because it is designed from the ground up, taking into account all the sporting disciplines, it allows space for them. It allows up to 10 firearms. Initially, and during the initial discussions, the authorities said, okay, we'll go for one. I said, one? Yes, because one's enough. And I said, yes, but for example, in IPSC, we've got IPSC shotgun, we've got IPSC rifle, we've got IPSC handgun, then there's a bit of ISSF bullseye, and your average person, if he's an all-rounded sports shooter, might need more than one firearm. So we came to a figure of 10, which is a bit arbitrary, but, at least we can cover most of our bases that way. And again, there are no caliber or magazine restrictions, because when the law was being drawn up, it was understood that you can have a 50-round magazine, you can have a 5-round magazine. It is an irrelevance. The collector's license allows people to have unlimited quantities in full working order. This means that the firearm itself maintains its intrinsic value. It's not ruined by being deactivated or marked in any ridiculous way. And of course, I understand that for collectors, this is absolutely vital. And the law focuses on important traceable components. So we're talking about receivers, we're talking about barrels, we're talking about frames. It doesn't look at nonsense like grips and stocks and magazines, which are essentially plastic components which can be reproduced in any backroom workshop or on a 3D printer. And because it focuses on the important components, therefore it can be enforced. All these things try to create a balance, by making sure that my firearms don't fall into the wrong hands. But it didn't break the social contract. It respected ownership rights. And this, the social contract is absolutely vital for our societies to function. If the citizenry feels that a law is unjust and illiberal, we're very imaginative people, especially in Malta. We think outside the box a lot. It is useless trying to impose an illiberal law upon us. People will find ways to break those laws. First, they will find ways to break the law in small ways, and they'll get away with it. And then they'll start finding ways to break the law in the bigger, more important ways. Now, with our Arms Act, because we feel respected by the authorities, because the state says, yes, you, Clive Brogdorf, can have 10 semi-automatic rifles in your safe. I trust you. I know you're not going to do anything wrong with them. I know they're not going to fall into the wrong hands. You're going to enjoy your sport. And that trust placed in me by the state means that, yes, then I can trust the state back. It's a give and take. The social contract is not broken by either party. And it's something, philosophical and psychological. But it means that it works. And it treats citizens as responsible individuals. It does not criminalize us a priori. It does not assume that we are going to do something bad with our firearms. It assumes that we're going to use our firearms for sport or collection or reenactment. It doesn't consider that we're going to go and, God forbid, commit a crime with our firearms. Then, of course, if somebody behaves badly, then that person is punished. But this is one of the intrinsic building blocks of a democratic society, isn't it? Of a free society, that you are not suspected of a crime before you actually commit a crime. We are all innocent until proven guilty. And it is based on agreement between all interested parties. It is not an illiberal imposition. And the biggest irony of it all is that it was drafted based on the 1991 EU Firearms Directive. When we first approached the authorities, we could either reinvent the wheel or we could take something which was working. So we took something which was working and we, fine-tuned it for Malta. But of course, this simply proves that the 91 version of the Firearms Directive is essentially a workable piece of legislation which has served us well and does not need the changes which are being proposed. How shall it be ruined? Because, of course, whenever bureaucracies get involved, unfortunately, one cannot assume that things will go on well indefinitely. The Commission proposals are criminalizing us a priori. They inferred that our legally held firearms can be used in crime. They inferred that our legally held firearms can be used in terrorism, which, of course, first of all, it's nonsense on stilts. It's not proven. Others have shown it. But even worse than that, even though they can't prove it, and even though, by and large, a lot of the proposals have been mitigated, the only thing they have succeeded in doing, really, apart from getting us all to unite together, is to destroy the trust that firearms owners previously had, the relationship of trust which previously existed between the firearms owners and the authorities. And this is extremely dangerous in the long term, because why does our Arms Act work? The authorities can't be everywhere. They can't be in our clubs, they can't be on the range all the time, they can't be on our Facebook pages all the time, and they shouldn't be there. It is none of their business. We do not live in a police state. But we are there. We are on the ground. And if we see that, somebody is saying strange things or behaving erratically or, going down a dangerous path or perhaps has problems at home or problems at work, we, as a firearms community, we act as a sort of a safety net, a supporting community for that individual firearm owner. If I see that somebody comes to the range and he's saying things which, give me cause for concern, I'll have a word with him. I'll tell him, do you really realize what you're saying and what you're doing? And if that doesn't solve the problem, if necessary, we'll ask the authorities to have a word with him. And maybe, he'll come to his senses. This happened in the early days when I first started shooting. I remember we used to go to the army range, and there was a shooting colleague of ours who was going through a very bad patch, and he said something, en passant, and we got pretty concerned about his, emotional health. And we had a word with him, and he was in a bad shape. And what we did was, we touched base with his local police station, and the inspector there very kindly, very calmly had a word with him. He told him, you want to leave your firearms for a few days or weeks at a dealer, are you well, are you this? And actually just having people speaking to him and making this person realize that he wasn't completely alone, he's still with us today. But the police would never have been able to do that on their own, could they? So we are the first line of defense. But we are the first line of defense because we respect the rules under which we operate. If the state alienates us, we will cease to do that. So not only will we be alienated, but the authorities will not be able to enforce the law correctly because it won't be receiving the help it needs from us. It will shift the focus from the individual to the equipment. And of course, there'll be problems for enforcement. Try to tell me how they're going to enforce magazine capacity restrictions. And, they put in this clause, which we didn't ask for ourselves, bluntly as IPSC, because some people have said, oh yes, you're happy, you got your exemption. We don't like the way it's being done, and we don't agree with it. Are the authorities going to come and ask me, Clive Brogdorf, who shoots IPSC in Malta? Who is a regular IPSC shooter? Give us a list of names. Absolutely not. And then people are going to start coming to me, Clive, say that I shoot IPSC. But you don't. oh, come on, you know. No, it's not going to work. And okay, the authorities are going to have to figure out on their own. I mean, they can't, so they won't enforce it, of course. So, you know, it will cause excessive administration. You're chasing after tiny little plastic boxes and little metal boxes. And so all the effort which should be put into real law enforcement and enforcing the, you know, the more serious parts of the Arms Act, all that effort will be taken up chasing after magazines. Please. So not only will the magazine restrictions be impossible to police, but the overall law will be weakened. And of course, then there'll be interstate problems. Some countries are more lenient than others. How will we put it down on our European firearms pass? It is, quite frankly, it's an absolute shambles. I mean, I just had my last communication with one of our MEPs was yesterday. And I said, okay, thank you very much for all the effort you've been putting in. But I very much fear that it's all been for nothing. Because if the directive is approved as it stands now, we'll get this result. A perfectly adequate piece of working legislation will be ruined and made unworkable. All for ideological reasons. And while effectively rendering it unworkable, to make matters worse, the institutions will have alienated a sizable chunk of the Maltese and European citizenry. And that chunk was, to date, the most law-abiding chunk of European citizenry. So try to understand the absolute lack of logic behind it all. They took the most law-abiding sector of the population on the European continent, called it a criminal, and alienated it. I mean, I fail to see the logic. People have got every right not to like firearms. People have got every right not to like the shooting sports. Everybody has got a right to his opinion. What people do not have a right to are their facts. The facts are not mine to bend as I see fit. The facts are those which were laid out by Jean-Carl. That there is no correlation between legal firearms ownership and violent crime and terrorism. So anyway, thank you for your time. And always, keep fighting the good fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you, Clive. Now, before I introduce Steve and Tomasz and Godfrey for the wind-up, we have time for 2 questions. So think carefully. 2 questions from the floor. 2 intelligent questions or 2 intelligent or sensible observations. All right, okay. A question observation. And we have 1 ex-captain. Ex-Captain Green. Is it working?
Hello.
There we go.
Okay, thank you, Vince. Thank you, everybody, for attending. It's been very interesting. I would like to start by saying, Herr Juncker, I am the lobby.
Anything else?
And I have sent him a JPG of the I am the lobby. What I'm trying to say is, Bill Clinton, we don't seem to talk much about America. Bill Clinton introduced some legislation in the States wherein they banned what the so-called assault weapons, but the bloody hell is an assault weapon anyway. And they introduced magazine restrictions, same as what the EU was doing. Fortunately, this law that they had introduced, the Democrats, had a sunset clause. And prior to this law, during and after this law, gun crime in America was going down. And when the Bush administration came in, they realized that this was a useless law, it was creating no benefits, and they decided to let this law expire. With the result that during the Clinton administration, I remember, magazines having more than 10 rounds, the price of them went through the roof, those that were grandfathered anyway. Today, there is no restriction. Now, the process of learning is to look at somebody else, see what their experience has been. Isn't the EU Commission realizing that what they are proposing has been tried in the States, was implemented, didn't work, and was put away? If you don't want to learn by looking at other people's examples, it's fairly evident that you are acting in a stupid manner.
James,
Thank
I
you.
was warned. It has to be a question. There has to be a question. Go ahead.
Yes, the question is
all right.
why, I've been watching a lot of discussions, why has not this example, fine example, not been brought up before the Commission?
Gentlemen?
It was actually brought up in front of the Commission. It was summarily ignored, like many other things which we've been telling them. And the one comment which I can offer here is actually a quote from Albert Einstein, who was a pretty intelligent person from all we know. He said that doing the same thing again, and again, and expecting different results is as close to insanity as he ever seen.
We have one last question.
Hello, hi. Just a 5-second question. Why is Switzerland so much against a national register? I saw you shaking your head very much against this. I was wondering if it's perfectly legal, perfectly a standard way to, it's accepted in Malta. Why did you object so much to having a national register on the arms? Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
It's a question of protection of personality. In Switzerland, I don't know how it is in Europe, but for us in Switzerland, the protection of personality is something important. And for example, as I told it just before, in 2011, we have voted people about arms, but one point was the question if we would have a federal national register, and we told no. Why? Because if the police wants really to know something for a police affair, they can ask the question of to the other police. But if you give too much to the state, one day you will have nothing more. That's the reason.
Yeah.
If I can offer one sentence of support here, unfortunately in Poland we do have a register of guns, but pretty often in the recent days when we discuss this stuff among the colleagues, we came to a conclusion that this is actually a single point of failure for the whole system. Because look at the situation which happened in Ukraine. When you have a foreign power invading your country, they have a single place to go and find out all the details about all the people who have the guns. How else can you make their life easier?
Just something concrete. The situation that I had to deal with as a lawyer. A man has a problem which had nothing to do with guns. Problem with somebody else, they fight, not really fight, they argue. And this, another man in the house called the police. So what did the police? They did controls about this man. Unfortunately for him, he has some guns. So the special unit of the police came. I mean, if you have any problem, a real problem of citizen, perhaps you can't, you will never see the policeman, but only because of, that's because, I mean, when there is, comment on dit grave, serious, the police has the right to do what's really necessary.
Let me just answer that question about gun registration from a very personal point of view. Coming from Germany, we kind of tend to learn from history, okay? Being Jewish, it's a tradition to learn from history. It's being imputed into you. You know, we have a very old people. Everybody tried to kill us. We survived, but only because we learned from history. What happened in 1928 in Germany? Germany was not a dictatorship then. It was the first democracy on German soil, the so-called Weimarian Republic. And because of internal problems they had, the left, the communists fighting the Nazis, and so on, government decided to have a registration. Amazingly so, the NSDAP, who was then sitting in parliament, was all for a registration. And some of their best lawyers drew up that registration. 5 years later, Adolf Hitler came to power. They used that registration to pull the first wave of Jews off the street. Every Jew was ordered to bring in his sporting guns and his air guns. And we published a book in Pro Legal, we published a book of a good friend of mine, Stephen Hallbrook, which really outlines that, and you can get it in English, you can get it in German and in French now. It is the one prime example where registration leads to. Because every government can change. Suddenly, some party, and we are right now in Germany on the brink of another very right-wing party to take over the government. It could happen. So what is going to happen then? Democracy is not for free, and it's not a constant factor. Democracy and liberty can disappear in a heartbeat. And the one thing, and we're getting back to the American example, why for the heck of it, and nobody asked that, are the American Constitution, those who wrote up these things, people like Jefferson and Madison and all that, why were they so adamant about having the Second Amendment? Because they knew that their freedom could be taken away by anybody coming over the border, or even by people who were elected into government. And we have enough examples in Europe, whether it was Franco or Mussolini or Adolf or Stalin. And I recommend to everybody of you, if you read one book in this year, read The Bloodlands of Timothy Snyder. Yeah, how in the last century, whole areas, Ukraine and Poland and so were diminished by millions of people because some idiot in power decided it. So why should we register our guns? Amazingly so, the Germans were very, very happy to get their guns registered, and our government was very proud in this last years that we finally finished registration. Luckily, our civil servants are such idiots that they made a lot of mistakes, and the computer system has been running, but has not been running properly for the last years. Thank you, sir. Let me add one thing, because everybody is here and Stephen is here. I want to thank, coming here, I didn't know what to expect, but I want to thank Stephen and his wife. Behind every good man, there's a better wife. And all these, and Thomas, for getting us all together here, because it really gave us. So we should give a big, big applause to these people who made it happen. Yeah. And who brought so much expertise here and so many really emotional things. I think we all kind of walk out of here with a better feeling than we came to. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay. Now, may I introduce for winding up?
There's no need to introduce.
Oh, David.
Let's cut it short. There's no worries. So we've come to the conclusion of this very long but very important, very, very important event. I do appreciate that you have stayed on in spite of us going over the limit, the time limit that we set. However, I'm sure you understood that this is a multifaceted issue. It affects so many people in different ways. So we've had people speaking about collections, we've had people speaking about civil liberties, people speaking about target shooting, people speaking about reenacting, people speaking about hunting. At the end of the day, this is the wonderful thing in all this. We are now speaking together. We are now one voice. This is what the Commission did not expect. This is what the Commission did not expect. This is why, over a year after this measure, after this proposal was made, where the Commission thought that it could steamroll it through with very, very little opposition, the Commission is still on the defense, still trying to push it and still being pushed, and will continue to keep on pushing it. So I know that they will lose face on this, but what would we rather have? A Commission that loses face, civil servants who are losing face, or citizens who are losing their civil liberties? I think the answer is pretty obvious. And we know exactly what we're doing, and we are very conscious of it, we are very proud of it, and we know it's the right thing to do. And that's what we're doing. And we're doing it on a voluntary basis, we're doing it with your help. We have done all this thanks to the funding that we have collected from individual firearm owners. We haven't got any money from industry, from trade. All the money that has been collected to put these conferences in place, the one in Brussels, the one here, the marketing that we're doing, is all from individual people. This is all about individual people. And as Vincent said before, the presence here of other organizations in the hunting community, in the reenactment community, in other sporting organizations, this is the beginning of something beautiful. And the something beautiful basically is the unity. We are now two associations that have together formed a federation. It is, for the very first time, a federation that tackles the aspirations of enthusiasts, and that is really fighting for their well-being. We are now being joined by other organizations. Other organizations are coming on board. This is an open federation. It is not a closed federation. Anybody is welcome to join. We just want to make sure that the persons joining us understand why we're doing it, and they come in with the right spirit. And I can see that happening. And my message to those who have not yet joined is forget the differences, forget petty arguments, forget commercial interests. Come on board. This is where you need to be. This is the voice of local enthusiasts. Join and let's work together. This is a joint effort. I'd like to thank my colleague, Godfrey, who has been instrumental in putting all this together, and I will ask Godfrey to say a few words as well. This is how it all started. This is a point where we reached where we said, listen, guys, we cannot do something if people are working in different directions. We have to pull the same end of the rope. And our cooperation is the beginning of a much, much bigger body. And this is why I'm very happy with the presence of other clubs, other associations, other federations. We will work with anybody to defend your interests. That's the whole thing. There are no hidden agendas here. It's a very straightforward message. Godfrey?
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Thomas, for being here. Thanks to all the European associations that are represented over here, to the local clubs and the Shooting Federation and everyone. I would like to thank the people that gave donations today, because we have collected a nice sum. Thank you very much, all of you. No, we're not going to stop. The federation happened. We worked hard for it. It's open to everyone. Everyone can be on board. We want everyone to participate. We've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, both in Europe and both locally. We are after a national shooting range, and we want to make that happen. And we want, with our partners in Europe, to work hard to safeguard our interests. Thank you all.
So from my side, I would like to thank you very much for being here with us and for the support you've been giving to the Firearms United and your local organizations over the months. Without you, we wouldn't be able to keep up the fight of David and Goliath with the European Commission. Stefan mentioned here that the Commission is frustrated and is about to lose a face. I'll give you just one example of how frustrated the Commission is. For the last 2 months, we've been called the aggressive gun lobby. And personally, I'm having this, and I'm taking this name, and I'm gonna take it with pride. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you to our foreign participants. Too many to mention by name, but you have seen now in the flesh the people who are working with us, the people who are really devoting a lot of attention. Yes. Who mentioned my better half? Somebody mentioned my better half, didn't he? Yes, I'm being reminded. We have, I would also like to thank the Malta Tourism Authority. The Malta Tourism Authority took an interest in this event because they recognize the fact that, first of all, one of the shows which they run, which is a reenactment show depicting a period from the Great Siege, is threatened by some of the proposals. They also realize that what we are proposing in terms of sports is something which would be very good for Malta and for sports tourism. They have assisted us, they have given us gifts which we've given to our foreign participants, and the last thing which we need to distribute is these books that are for the speakers. So I will start by my friend,
Thank you.
Jean-Luc. Tomasz, you're closer, so obviously this is much easier. Mikko, something to take back to Finland. Clive, no. Anne, can you bring them over, please? So, Sasha, there he is. How could I have missed Sasha? It's impossible. Sasha, thank you. Thank you for being here. Who am I missing? I'm missing somebody. I'm missing somebody. Speakers. Foreign speakers. Has anybody, am I missing somebody here? No? Okay, that's it. So we have some extra books, which we will, one extra book. Okay, we'll give that away. Thank you once again. Thank you for your donations. I was not following that because I've been too busy here. And it's been an incredible 3 days working on this project. So thank you so much. You can start making your way, and we're here to dismantle, but if there's anybody who would like to speak, please go ahead. I've just been invited to a TV show on Super One on Monday. I believe that somebody from DAS has also invited, so I'd like that person to coordinate with me because we have to do this well. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you once again.